or another sort of monthly guest speaker interview, whatever we're sort of classifying these as now. But I'm welcoming Ryan Bourdo to the stage today. So one host of things. Ryan's also, and maybe I'm making a trend here that I shouldn't, but Ryan was sort of in this cohort of folks and students back 2015 to 2018, roughly graduating years that I keep bumping back into. I'd always pegged him as the running guy in terms of his involvement with runners and athletes, sort of Chris Johnson's group and cohort. So lo and behold, when I saw him commenting, dare I say, with lots of nuance and critical thinking skills about long COVID and post-viral illness, I'm like, I want to know how that guy got from marathon runners to there, or to now looking at this that we see in the overlap between the 5 elements of health. And to my surprise, perhaps he's also going to show like how the similarities between those two groups are, which I think is a really cool way to look at it. So yeah, we're going to kind of go through all of those and just give you a timeline. Ryan started sort of more treating post-viral illness and stuff in the hospital system 7-8 months ago. So he's only been doing this for a short amount of time, which I think is also cool because it gives us perspective. The moment you change a population that you're working with, all of a sudden drastically changes maybe your potentially outlook on the healthcare system, but also your outlook on how you're talking and working with patients and stuff like that. So it gives a great, I think, representation of, depending on the population you're working with, really changes sort of the skill set or explanation of certain things. But hopefully there's some carryover of like the 5 elements of health and how we take care of different groups of people. So Ryan, as always, appreciate having you on. Not as always, for the first time, I should say. But yeah, I gave it teed up a little bit of background, but if you want to give any more info on your sort of background on that, and then really go into the first question of like, probably maybe describing post-viral illness and how that could be good or bad in terms of the category of what that is, would be a great place.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, thanks. This has been a big change, kind of what you said, in just like how I treat and look at folks. And like, I think, and we talked about this a little bit, like, I was like gearing up to just go into straight like treatment of runners, go into some performance coaching and things like that. And even in my previous practice, where it was a lot of outpatient, a lot of orthopedics, like it was always interesting, but like the more interesting aspects of like figuring out like not just like why someone knee hurt, but why they think that their knee is jacked up. And like when people say like, I just don't trust my knee, I was like, ooh, that's more interesting to talk about. Like mechanics of the knee, like can be interesting, but let's talk about like how you feel about it, sort of thing. And even with like coaching, I was trying to figure out a lot of just like how to like get around the stuff of like, why are people saying like, if I'm not running, like, who am I? It's like, that's a more interesting conversation than just like, I'm going to try to, you know, get your marathon time down by 5 minutes. After thinking about it for a while, that's not a very good way to make money of it. Just like, let's just talk about your running, and things like that. And just figuring out like, you know, probably most runners are redlining themselves a bit too much. We should all just kind of literally slow down. But that also is not really a good money making venture to be like, hello, I'm your coach, you should do less. So when I was just looking for new jobs, I got hooked up with OHSU, and they had 2 different like teams available to be on. One was complex medical, one was kind of general ortho spine. I was like, complex medical had chronic pain, fibromyalgia, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, like hypermobility. It's like I haven't played around with that in sandbox in a while. Like that would be interesting. I liked all that stuff in school. I liked the population that I was treating at some of my other clinicals. Let's hop on that. So yeah, that's where I kind of just first dipped my toes into it. And then over time, it was just like, just the system itself and just like the way I think would be best serving these patients, like changed completely how I would like practice. Like, I don't think I've seen someone 1 time a week, let alone 2 times a week ever in the last 7 months. Like I see people like 1 time a month. You know, if people want to do 2 times a month, fantastic. But like I'm seeing folks on a long-term scale. I still have patients from November that I'm seeing, and I've seen them 6 times. So technically we're doing progress evals this month, even though I've seen them starting in November kind of stuff. Yeah, so that's a little timeline on me. In terms of just kind of general overview of like long COVID post-viral illness, myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, I mean, I think this is part of the biggest issue with this on a grand scale is like these things are similar, but they're different. They have underpinnings that are all the same. They have interconnected symptoms. All of this stuff has been present for a while. Post-viral illness in the most broadest, like generic term, but COVID was a big viral illness, if to say the least, and that kicked off a lot of exposure to get people to potentially get post-viral illness, what we now call long COVID, sort of thing. So the numbers have been rapidly increased, sort of thing. But all this stuff has been floating around for decades, if not longer, sort of thing. It just took this for more people to look at it. People have been advocating and looking at this stuff for the last few decades. Just few or people were like being like, I don't think that's a real thing. More people were doing that back in the day, I should say. But there's still people suffering from this stuff, prior to COVID, that just like fewer people were looking at back then. Did I answer it? Like, I can get into more like symptoms and just like general what we see, if that's
No, I think the
kind of
semantics are key, especially from like someone who's still trying to figure this out a little bit and doesn't think I treat anybody well. How I treat is very different now at this point, but those are ones to get me. My sort of understanding is exactly how you sort of said it. Like there's a lot of these overlapping symptoms from it. And I think it's, I follow a lot of Todd Davenport who talks about it and those things on social media. And I know if he puts it certain ways, and I also can acknowledge like it's not always an exclusion criteria to get to that diagnosis. Like there's other things, which make it difficult, I think, for those of us who might be more ortho based of like, well, we know when something doesn't sound right and it doesn't quite match anything we exactly know, but also how do we label it? And then maybe most importantly, what do we do, or how do we get them to the right person?
Yeah.
Which sounds like most of these folks, and I'd be curious if you test this, have already been through who knows how many providers or ways to even get to you in the first place.
Yeah.
Kind of what you brought up is it's an interesting like admin perspective that might be unique to hospitals where you can actually see someone over that long course of time. I need to get 6 to 8 weeks. Does that become, I know when I was at the outpatient neuro for like folks at the EDS, it was always like, okay, during a year, you're going to probably get so many visits with me. How do you really move this out? And how does like insurance look at long-term care for that? So if you have any admin insight into that, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. No, Todd Davenport is my trigger phrase because I try to emulate him as much as possible. So if I sound like a watered down version of him, then I'm happy with that. So yes, everyone should follow Todd on this stuff because this is where most of my information is coming from, sort of thing. So yes, you should not listen to me. You should listen to him, but I'm trying to say what he says. So yeah. So like admin-y things. Yeah, I think like I've been talking about this too. I had a student for the first time who wants to look at this stuff on her own, like in her own area in Oregon, kind of more central Oregon, which is like a more rural population, high desert area kind of thing. You get a lot of kind of farmers and things in that kind of zone, kind of outside of Denver area stuff, very similar. And we're talking about just like logistics of this kind of population. And, I trying to game this out. I have a really hard time squaring. Like, I think like this could be a tough thing for like outpatient clinics, let alone like private outpatient clinics to really like manage this stuff on like a large scale. I think 1 or 2 patients could be okay, but like I have the benefit of more or less flying under the radar now that I'm saying it live on Meta, kind of thing. But like I have a unique opportunity to kind of like play with the system a little bit because like it's just such a big thing. And like insurance companies, I haven't had any kickback from like these long-term type of things. Granted, again, I've been here for 7 months. Like when I read a plan of care for 6 months and that's 6 visits, I don't think the insurance companies, at least so far with my experience, haven't really given me a lot of negative feedback yet, sort of thing. And like I've used that both just like with the insurance considerations in mind, the logistics of my physical schedule. Our biggest problem is that like we have a big access problem at my hospital, where like, I'll get 3 to 8 evals a week, and then we're booking out follow-up appointments like a month or two later anyways, sort of thing. Just because like all referrals are coming to us, and it's just hard to like get everyone up the appropriate care. But I think that has justified and I have integrated that into my practice of like, this is long-term management solutions. This is not like we're gonna do a superset and get you over your long COVID. This is like just management. This is just talking about your day-to-days, figuring out strategies, not only for you to self-monitor yourself, but also to like figure this stuff out on the fly on your own. And like I've been messing around with some like strategies for folks in terms of like kind of real-time assessment stuff. But a big thing is just like pen and paper, like write down your activities you're doing in a day. How do you feel in the moment? And maybe 1 to 2 days later, because that's where people usually feel the worst is, 1 to 2 days later, things like that. So yeah, the admin side plays into my favor, or maybe I've just coerced it to pay in my favor, kind of thing.
Fair, right? And likely, again, I felt that same when I was at my outpatient neuroclinical. Of if someone had stroke, or finally had gotten the diagnosis, which always surprised me at how relieving that felt to some of them. But I think it also helped in terms of being in the medical system of like, okay, this is a diagnosis that insurance probably doesn't exactly like. I sprained my ankle. People probably have a better idea in terms of insurance. Like, here's what that should be, even if
right. Yep.
But in terms of like post-viral illness, I don't think anybody really has a clue, and especially considering it's likely there for potentially forever. Like, hopefully, yes, we can work the system in a way that doesn't get you in trouble, but also that helps. One just gets you reimbursed continuously. I think that's the key from all that. But it's a really good segue though, the superset comment into whether it's Todd Davenport or others. I think that's been my biggest thing of, as a guy who used to teach clinicians, like, let's load it. Like, we're not making people lift heavy enough. Like, I've definitely taken like 7 steps back for most of that, but also especially in terms of post-viral illness of, exercise isn't like the panacea I once thought it was. Even like just as itself. And also that like when we talk about the elements of health, like move could really be anything. It could be day-to-day stuff. It could be, drawing, writing. And I've really shifted, I think, my mindset from like, okay, we're going to load to, well, maybe exercise actually is like worsening people.
Yep.
It's weird to think. And I'd probably argue at like a huge population of the whole United States. Generally speaking, exercise is probably still net positive for the whole population. But folks of your population, maybe that isn't the case. So yeah, speaking to the superset comment, dosage, like how that shifted for you, but maybe also how it's similar to how you're viewing it for your like runners that you would previously thought you were going to be great.
Yeah. We can go into, so this is part, like, I'll give you a little bit of insight into like what I teach folks. If we like, is time like a big factor here? Like, what are we working on? I honestly, I could talk about this forever, but
as long as we're done a little before 11, like 2 minutes before, I have to go stretch people. So we good.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So can you give me sharing capabilities?
That's a great question. Can I, if I make you hosts, let's see that.
Yep. I think I can work with this. Okay. Can you see?
You even came prepared. See, I shouldn't underestimate.
Wow. Well, so like here, I need to move this. I'm not looking at my second screen. I'm looking at your face somewhat. So to peek into a little bit of like what I do for folks with this kind of stuff is like a lot of it is resource management. Like you said it exactly. Like people are seeing countless of specialists even before they see me, which in of itself, if I hear I've seen 10 doctors that don't know what's going on, that is the biggest red flag that I've seen that can tell me the quickest that they probably have something related to this sort of thing. but just rabbit holing, going through every specialist, like everything's coming back normal. I would argue that they're testing for the wrong stuff, but sure, normal tests mean you have nothing wrong, whatever.
Yeah.
Getting the best resources to patients is one of my biggest things. So I've created this little link tree that I send out, and it has just a bunch of just disability resources that I've found that I like. I've made things for folks with dysautonomia and POTS, like different electrolyte suggestions, messing around with some outcome measures, because like the one we use is not really that great. So I kind of like co-opt some of these other ones that I like. But this is where like, just like making this stuff as digestible and easiest for folks as possible is the best way I've found to kind of like help folks, just educating what like the damn thing is. So looking into post-exertional malaise, which is what we're talking about, right? This is all from a study. Work Well Foundation did this study. Todd Davenport, I think, is, if not the lead author, second lead author, right? So this is me cribbing.
Right. I think you're sharing your like checklist and then that. So you might be sharing a different screen.
Well, let's go. You can look at my crazy checklists and trying to figure out what to talk about.
We'll
Let's
get into
go.
the Notion website and database later because that we might have to do a follow up on data. But anyways, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Here we go.
You can see this better. Okay.
This is part of the link tree that you're sending out. This makes sense.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So here is the link tree.
It's great.
Yeah. Kind of thing. So going back here. So this is a talking point that I have. Like post-exertional malaise is not just people being lazy, right? This is people like having a real physiological like feedback system, to say the least, with like exertion. Ventilatory anaerobic threshold, the grand poobah of like, things we measure for folks who want to like push their system a bit. This is heart rate training 101 kind of stuff. This is where we figure out different thresholds and like playing around with that. So this kind of study, I want to say, I think this is from 2019. I think the studies were earlier, but this is the paper I got it from, blah, blah, blah. Basically what they showed, folks with experiencing post-exertional malaise, their VATs were less than kind of the same cohort, roughly the same cohort of healthy but just sedentary individuals. Okay. Healthy but sedentary individuals, their VATs didn't change from one test one day to the same test the next day, sort of thing. What I tell my patients too is on that second day with folks experiencing post-exertional malaise, not only did their VAT drop a little bit, but they felt like crap when they were trying to do this stuff the second day. Like they were experiencing symptoms in the moment, and just like with the testing, they went through it again. And, I don't think the paper talked about this, but they probably felt even worse the day after, kind of thing, right? Sort of thing. So, mitochondria, the age-old thing that everyone seems to know, powerhouse of the cell. Sure, great. Jeopardy points for everybody. But it does so much more than just like energy production. It has wide variety implications, sort of thing. And what this paper is showing is that like the mitochondria via the aerobic energy system is being affected. Right. Yeah. So my explanation here is basically just like, if we got these hybrid cars running around, your aerobic system is roughly your gas engine, your anaerobic system is your hybrid battery. Hybrid battery is there. It does little things here and there. But your aerobic system is your gas tank. And your aerobic system is essentially what? Shrunk, right? So you're gathering more exertion and pushing yourself quicker into your anaerobic state, sort of thing. So like a walk to the mailbox is like deadlifting 300 pounds, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So another point that I'm trying to talk about more too, like, when people look at this car, they don't see the energy systems, right? You're not seeing the gas tank. You're not seeing the hybrid battery and their functionality. Like you may see a car like sputtering off the road kind of thing, but like you look at one car versus the other, they all look like cars, right? Which is kind of like the invisible nature of this stuff. Like you can't pick out necessarily like one person from the other just by looking at them, and, healthcare system. Hey, you look fine. Why are you here? Your tests are fine, sort of thing. That's part of the underlying problem with all this stuff, is that like there's no great test aside from this CPET test, 2-day CPET test, to really demonstrate this level of condition, I guess to say.
Yeah, and maybe I mean, zooming out from like the minutia here, the mitochondria of that stuff, it also is, I think, just a massive kudos to you. Of any group I've seen you in, you've somehow managed to curate information in a way that makes it accessible, whether that's the running group or back when we were students going through mentorship stuff.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I look at the link tree and I scroll through and I'm like, there was always that push for us to be master clinicians, especially with our hands. Like, right, get the reps overall.
For
And
sure.
it always makes me almost as amazed, if not more, to see you or anybody do something like this that goes, here's all this information that's out there, and let me curate it and make it easily accessible and digestible by the people I'm trying to help, which feels like a fundamentally like essential skill that isn't always like praised or honed as much as the either interventions I can do. To me, this is like an intervention in a nutshell of just, I know it's considered education, I guess, if you had to label it as something, but to me, through like, master craft of information curation, which is wild.
Thanks. Yeah.
You could dive into the mitochondria and car thing for another 3 hours if you had to, but no, that's helpful. Yeah. As far as that goes, when people see you, okay, if they've seen temp providers, you kind of have these sort of resources for them. You're kind of saying like, hey, this is a long-term management of this. I think some of the questions in here about lifestyle, coping, and mental health, I'll doing this. And it's actually interesting you mentioned the runner of like, I identify as this runner. And when I work with neuro, all of a sudden it's like, whatever I did identify with, I now almost have a new identity. And again, it's the same thing of like, you could probably just talk to that person about that thing. Cause one, it's way more interesting of like, yeah, that's a cool thing. But also then I have to use that and understand that to then help somebody. And I'm like that idea of identity, and you can layer in mental health, coping, lifestyle, how you want to, but how that sort of has fit in and what you've sort of learned in the 7 months there.
Yeah. So I think that's a big component of this stuff. Like, maybe it's how I practice, maybe it's me, but I think like if anyone's touching these kind of patients, like you need to talk to them on just like kind of grander things than just like let's set up a program to make you walk a little bit more. Like, we're talking about like literally death of identities here, and like that's a common phrase that I've heard in the different groups I'm just like kind of touching on, and just like looking into. Like it's a very real thing, and like sitting there and just like watching people just like realize that like they're not going to be able to do as much stuff today, maybe not for a while, is a tough thing for everyone involved, sort of thing. Like I just told like a person in their 20s that like maybe camping's not in the books for a couple of years, if ever, kind of thing. And they're just like, well, how do I get better? It's like, this is how we start getting better, like things like that. And just like talking about how like the ambitions that this person had and things like that. Like it's tough, and it's a lot of just like talking through that. And honestly, like a lot of what I do is just a version of counseling. I think like the way I square it, it's always in mind of like activities. Like these activities can be emotional, like social, they can be cognitive, they can be physical activities, even at like household chores and things like that. So by keeping it a frame on that when talking about that stuff in terms of like people's mental health, I think is still within a realm I'm comfortable with. But pretty soon people start talking about relationships and like how they like see themselves. And like I think there's like in terms of how they see themselves, there's some aspects you can still talk about, but like I'm pulling the lever quicker now and be like, this is out of my realm. Like I can't talk about this stuff. You like, if you have a therapist of some kind, you need to talk about that with them. And honestly, that's what I talk with my therapist about, like setting boundaries. Because it's very easy to like get into like, not the weeds is too disparaging a term, but like get into people's lives and they talk about stuff pretty readily when you're talking about this like very like raw space that they're in. And like they like more often than not, people ask me like, why aren't you just like a therapist? I was like, I don't know. I didn't step on a butterfly 5 years ago, and that's why. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
but like that's that. Sorry, I didn't hear that. What'd you say?
Awesome. Thank you for that butterfly effect reference. That's great. Yes.
Right. Yeah. But this is the realm we're talking about. Like, uh, some people are more readily accepting of this, but I have people who are like, I hear you. So if I just work 1,000% hard at this, then I'm going to be fine. I was like, this is going to be a while, sort
Yeah.
of thing. But I often talk about this death of identity and like this kind of like what you were mentioning in terms of um, just activity and just load it kind of stuff. I take a look back and just think like, what are like meaningful activities? Like, not just like, what is the thing that's going to bring you joy, but like, what is like this minimum viable thing that brings you maximum joy with the least amount of like energy expenditure,
Yeah.
sort of thing. And that's what we're talking about with folks. So just like really taking a hard look at their lives of just like, what can you do to maximize how much like happiness you can get with the energy systems you got.
Yeah. Totally. I like the within the realm of activities, I think was a great way to phrase that. I think that's how I've sort of lined it too. And one, importantly, not avoiding those conversations at all, but always trying
Yeah.
to do it. And to your point of probably good to have a therapist to help you figure out like what do those boundaries look like.
Yeah.
It takes a toll on us to consistently talk people through that and make sure that we feel like we're professionally doing well, but also like as human beings from that aspect of it. Um, no, I mean, that's quite incredible, especially to go through. And one just shows like the heaviness of what this means, and also like how, again, whether long COVID is downplayed in terms of actually getting it or not, like the risk of having this stuff once people get there. And I think the newest estimation came out, like Justin Moore, I think is the CEO of APTA, was tweeting about the new numbers on it. And it's something like seven
Yeah.
of the population they think have long COVID now, which is in the scope of numbers, like 23 million people. And I'm like, yeah, this is wild. And this probably isn't the last virus that we will see that will have it, at least in our lifetime for sure. I would bet that there's going to be another one like this, and hopefully with mortality rates that are lower, if not like right. Like I think we got lucky in some sense, but are we prepared as sort of the leaders and rehab professionals in musculoskeletal care and exercise to
Yeah.
and my gut response, aside from you and maybe a few others, is largely no. Like, I don't know if we are equipped to do it because it is such a different mind frame of that. And my last point, I guess I'd make for that is I think this has helped me actually have the conversations with folks around the idea of natural history,
Mm,
especially with like plantar fasciitis, frozen,
sure.
like things that we know we may be able to help. And I'm like, I do think loading will help, but I also know this might be something you have to manage and
Yeah.
just usually gets better over time in ways we don't even quite understand. Um,
Yeah.
I think having these conversations has helped me even bring that into the orthopedic realm, which I guess my last question for you would be to some of the ones that people brought up of, are you often seeing an overlap between chronic pain, whether it be hip, low back, stuff like that?
Mhm.
And are those almost, I don't want to say treated separately, but do you think about them slightly differently in the context or similar, or how's that work?
Yeah. And I think this will go into, it'll touch a little bit of what we've been talking about. Like, like from the people that I see, which is the people I see, so that's only how I can frame it because like we know that so many people with long COVID like can't even access healthcare system, right? That's a huge portion of this that
Yeah,
can't be not said.
yeah,
Um, the folks that I see more often than not also have just these underlying conditions. Like you talk about their history for more than like a few minutes, you're like some of this stuff was already floating around in your system before this.
yeah.
Like, you know, the question I'm starting to ask more is just like, when's the last time you felt healthy?
Mm,
I'm getting people saying like they've never felt healthy in their entire lives, sort of thing. Like just to the scope of like these people's conditions and things like that. So there's that component. People can come in with also the diagnosis of long COVID and experiencing just widespread chronic pain, whether we want to call it fibromyalgia, hypermobility. Not that that's chronic pain, but
yeah, yeah.
but just like other things that have been causing pain for so long, right? there is an aspect with some people who like, they're not doing anything because they've already inherently known that like doing more like makes things worse on the whole for them. So we have to also acknowledge there's a level of deconditioning that's happening in these folks, and that's causing pain, irritation in various points based on like, a whole slew of things. And so like it's that fine line of like which thing do we want to manage first, sort of thing. Post-exertional malaise, always the top thing. That's always the front of mind. That's always the thing we're doing. But for folks who are just like, just not doing a whole lot, like they're also just restless. They're sitting with themselves. They're sitting in their head a little bit more, and that's causing a lot of just body scanning. And just like when things just like are just sitting there, everything just feels like crap for a variety of reasons. And so like that is it chronic pain in terms of like, am I seeing CRPS more often in these populations? Like, no. But people are coming in with all these other underlying conditions, and people are just more sedentary because we want them to be. But then that's bringing on a whole slew of like real musculoskeletal things, right?
Yep.
So where I kind of sit with the treatment aspect is post-exertional malaise is always the front of mind thing, but like things like gentle isometrics and things like that, just to kind of keep things like working for the right patient, like can be enough to kind of just like both scratch that itch of like I'm trying something, but also just like can you work the muscles in a way that just like makes joints, muscles just feel a touch better.
Yeah, totally.
So, but it is this huge interplay of like what things do we address first?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Which is a lot to, have people take in when they're thinking about, especially if the diagnosis of whatever post-viral illness it is relatively
Yeah.
new. I can't imagine, because most of us just want to get out of pain, and that's a
Yeah.
human response. And to
Yeah.
be like, oh, okay, now there's this sort of hierarchy, almost to some degree, of this is going to affect all those other things is quite wild.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. But anyways, no, it's appreciated to find to know that like there's one, you're just curating these resources. One, I'm just looking at the link tree and seeing the disability sort of resources that you have.
Yeah.
I'd encourage you, and I'll post, and you might already follow this, but there's a podcast called Ologies.
Allergies.
Yes, with Allie Wards, but they had one on disability
Hey, all right.
that I thought was incredible.
Yeah.
Really, really good. But just the same thing of like, what are the resources out there for folks? What does it need? And we do
Yeah.
this all the time working with employers. Like, how do people navigate workers' comp? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to think like people are trying to work the system. We generally see and believe it's a small percentage, but also most people don't even want to deal with it because they're like, I don't even know how it works. Like, and how do I like show that I'm actually this? And we know that has a huge sort of thing within the post-viral illness world, but we might have to save that sort of specific one for another one to go through it. But all to say, like the curation of this stuff is absolutely incredible, and I can't wait to share it with the other APHPT folks. But definitely we need to get you on for another time and talk through maybe more details of certain stuff. Maybe we'll try to get you and Todd on at the same time and see what that explosion would be. I don't know if he also has the beard and goatee, but we can put you up next to each other.
Sure. Yeah.
No, this is incredible. And just thank you for highlighting these things and at least giving a rough overview. So those of us who are still trying to learn now have a place to go to maybe get better at this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'll give you a small preview. I've reworked the long COVID protocol that we have at OHSU here. It was originally 10 pages. I have turned that thing into 22 pages. So it's being finalized. I'm setting up meetings so we can get like the people who are involved with it, like checking off and get their opinion, because it's just basically now just me ranting. But once that's kind of finalized, that my next step is to try to like get it out there a little bit more, and just to get feedback from it and just seeing if this is what the most people are doing.
Yeah.
But we can definitely talk about that stuff once that's more finalized and get into more nitty gritty stuff.
Perfect. Appreciate
Yeah.
that. Well, as always, thank you. APHPT,
Yeah.
you'll see this in the workplace, but also YouTube coming soon to you.